And I want to welcome you to another monthly webinar produced for the membership of the National Chimney Sweep Guild. This webinar is presented by CVC Success Group. And today I'm Jerry Eisenhower. Along with me is Cheryl Eisenhower because she brings some pretty good skills in what we're going to talk about today. And the title of today's webinar is Communication. And the tagline is, it may be your answer to better leadership and higher sales. So Cheryl, you ready to start this webinar today?
Ready to go.
Okay, so here's where we're at today. Today we live in a culture where technology seems to have taken over everywhere and everything that we do. But here's a simple true fact. Technology does not and will never replace the ability to properly communicate with others. You see, in your job as an entrepreneur, you have to communicate with many different types of personalities. This could be anywhere from the people on your team to your customers and so many others. And communication is one of the secrets of success, both in leadership and also in higher sales and better customer service. And as I went through, believe it or not, today, I've gotten several different emails from different mentors of mine, one being John Maxwell, another being a guy by the name of Joe Polish that I watch and listen to a lot. He's got some really great ideas, who also shares a lot of things out to the world on how to be better. You see, again, today, there is no software, there is no customer response management system. There's no system out there that can replace the need for great communication with others. And it's really hard today to communicate effectively with others because our minds are on so many different things. But in order to be successful, we've got to get ourselves in sync of how do we do this communication. A lot of times we think that as businesses, if we simply show up to do the job on time and do everything that we're supposed to, that we're going to excel. But so much of the business world results come from communication, right from the time people call into your office and there's a voice communication over the telephone. It may be communication in writing. It could be in any number of different areas. But communication is a skill that we all need to work on. And the reason I've asked Cheryl to join me today on this is because of her background and her training from two aspects. One is the training that she went through with the Ziegler Corporation in order to become a Ziegler coach and trainer. But the other and more important is that several months back, Cheryl went through training as a DISC assessor. And to be honest with you, whenever we first did this, I didn't understand DISC to the degree that it's come through today. So I've asked Cheryl on the call today so she can answer some questions for me. So Cheryl, you ready for the questions?
Start on. We'll try to do our best.
Okay, so DISC is spelled DISC. And there's a lot of different behavior assessment programs out there that people can participate in. But DISC is kind of the background and the basis for all of them as we look at this, and people have adapted different ways. But the DISC process, the DISC behavior assessment, goes back a number of years, doesn't it?
Many, many years. It started out just as pen and paper and has moved on to a real high tech situation.
Okay, so when you've given DISC assessments to people and then debriefing them on their results, do you commonly hear that people tell you it's almost like that assessment read their minds? Do you ever hear that?
Out of about 99.9%.
Right. And would you agree from the people you've given them to that the DISC assessment gives a very true picture of their personality and the way they behave?
As long as they have not tried to alter the answers to read as you want them to hear, as long as they take it honestly, it's spot on.
Okay, so in the DISC assessment, there's communication, both in the way they communicate and the way that you have to communicate with them and the way to avoid communicating with that particular DISC profile. Would that be true?
Yes, there's actually a full page and section on it. It actually gives you the cues of how you want to be communicated with and how others want to be communicated with is on theirs. It's a page that I suggest after you get that particular page on the disc needs to be shared with a lot of people. You don't have to share your disc, but that page is the only one that is meant for other people.
Okay, so let's go through what the D, the I, the S, and the C mean. Tell me something. A D personality. Describe what a D personality is.
A D can, can be considered, if you're a high D, you're very demanding, you're very decisive, you make very quick answers. They might not always be thought through, but you can come off with an answer. Usually they're good leaders as long as they're not a extremely high D. And then even if you're a low D, you can still, if you have other letter or sections that work well, you can still be a good leader, but your decisions will be a little slower.
And what is the secret to communicate effectively to someone with that high D personality?
Those of us with high Ds we're very quick. We don't like to listen to a lot of detail. We want things spoken to us and actually sold to us if you're a salesman very quickly. We don't need the minor details. We want to know just enough to make our decisions.
Okay, so as a rule, is a high D personality one that wants to listen to others for an extended period of time?
No, they do not like to listen. They want to move on. By the time you've talked about 30 seconds, their mind's on the next subject, whether you're talking or not.
So how can you spot a high D personality in communication?
In person, it's fairly easy. They're very motion driven. You can see their feelings on their face. Their hands are not continually moving, but they have very aggressive moves. They are very bold, and they talk very fast. Unless you pay attention, a disc will tend to talk at about this speed, being a D. And the bad part about that's hard to communicate with other people with.
So what do you want to avoid in communicating with a high D personality?
Don't talk too much. Give them the bullet points, give them what they need to know, be accurate. Come prepared. Don't have to search for your answers because they don't have time to wait.
Okay, so the second letter is an I. So tell us what describes a person with a high I behavior patterns.
A very, very high I would be, let's say, the woman in the grocery store that's moving her hands very quick. She's talking fairly fast, and actually she could talk to a bag of beans and should be fine. She wants to talk, or he wants to talk all the time and to any and everybody.
And what's the secret to effectively communicate with the I personality?
The I, if you have personal touch, they like touch. You want to not aggressively, but they like to know that they're important. They want to be told they're important. They want you to speak fairly quickly. Again, if you have time to speak, usually a really high I, you're not going to get but a few words in because they're going to talk all the time.
And with a high I personality behavior pattern, what type of communication styles do you want to avoid using with this person?
Don't try to jump in on them. They want to talk. They want to be the center of attention. Again, you're going to have to use the we word. You cannot use I because they are the we people. We want to do this. We need to do this. We need to get this done. They like large groups. They like attention more than anything else.
And what do we want to avoid when we're communicating with a high personality under the I?
Breaking in, talking. You have to listen very quickly. If you come back at them in between the words, they get annoyed. So sometimes you just have to stand back and let them say what they've got to say And then intercede with knowledge, not with details.
And now let's move to the S personality. Describe what an S behavior pattern is in a person.
An S is usually classified as your speed or your stability. A high S person is going to be very monotoned. They are not going to have very active movements. They're going to talk a little slower. They're going to think a little more. They're going to, if they have movements at all within their hands, they're very manipulated. They know exactly what they're doing. They're very slow, but it's because they're thinking.
So what's the secret for effective communication with a person who has an S personality?
With them, you need to come with the details. They want to know how, where, when, why, what's it going to do. Don't miss the details and do not try to oversee them. Listen to them first. Let them tell you what they want. They know, and then suggest things because they have to take time to absorb it. If you talk too fast or over their head, you've lost their sale.
Okay. And what do we want to avoid with the S personality in our communication with these?
Fast speaking, trying to be too personal. You want to come off first with a nicety to the person, but don't stay on it. Get to the details. Avoid talking too fast and actually avoid not listening, because if you don't listen, they don't think you care.
Okay. So from that point, let's go to the C behavior pattern. What describes a person with a high C personality?
The higher up on the C scale, the more near to perfectionism they are. The lower, the more geared to being maybe careless. So the higher up they are, the more they're going to think. They dot all their I's, they cross all the T's. One of the jokes is that they read the Xerox copies for errors.
Okay. So how do we communicate effectively with the C behavior pattern?
Of all of the above that we've talked about, you do not want to show any sense of aggressiveness. You want to stand as still as you possibly can. You want to look them in the eye. You want to talk to them very, not mama slowly, but very slowly, just like the S, and even more, they have to absorb. The bad part about a C, they will rarely have facial expressions. You have no idea whether you're doing a good job or no idea whether you're doing a bad job. You just have to listen and work.
Okay. And what do you avoid when you're dealing with the C behavior pattern personality?
Mainly, do not be aggressive. Do not whale your hands around. Again, be still as possible. Talk knowledgeably and answer all their questions, because out of everyone, they're going to have more questions than any of the ones. And if you're selling to them, this group of people will notoriously be the people that say, let me think about it. As a rule, they're not putting you off. They really do need to think about it. They need a period of time to look at all the details, do some due diligence, and come up with the answers.
Do any of these behavior personality styles enjoy being interrupted, or when they're talking where someone shuts them down? Is there a behavior pattern that accepts that well?
There's no behavior pattern that accepts that. The main thing, as the person that you're communicating, you need to learn to listen. You need not to break in. Let them finish what they've got to say. Don't stop any of them in mid-sentence, because if you do, you may miss the detail that you needed to know. And that's what most of us have a problem doing, especially the D's and the I's have an extremely hard time of listening. We could tend to be put into the group of selective listeners.
Okay, so is there a behavior style that is the most difficult to manage if there's an employee?
A high D, the higher the D, the more they are to be they're their own boss. They're their own, whether they're right or not, they are. Whether they're wrong, they're not. So nothing you do can get through to them unless you can convince them that it's their idea and that that's the way to do it, and they come up with the answers.
Which of the behavior patterns is the easiest personality style to manage?
An S, if you communicate in the correct way, again, very, very calmly, they are on the people side of the spectrum, where a D and a C are task oriented, an I and an S are people oriented. So they will communicate with you, and they are easier to manage than a task oriented person.
Okay, I've often heard you say on D personalities, when you're working with a leader in DISC assessments, that often high D personalities lead with demanding and instilling fear versus persuasion. Can you go a little detail in that? How can people go from demanding into more persuasive types of communication?
Well, I'm going to take it to a personal note. As most people that know me know, I'm a 99D. But to be able to work with people, I am more of a persuasive person. I don't manipulate you, but I want you to have part of the decision in what you're thinking. So I do what I adapt my D down, because I think persuasion just draws more people in. A very high D that cannot deal with persuasion but has to deal with demanding becomes the boss that, if he's not really careful, will close his people down or scare them to death. He'll never have respect. He'll have fear, but he'll never have respect. With persuasion, you have the respect without the fear.
Gotcha. And if you were to say of the four behavior patterns, which would be the most effective president of the United States, in your opinion?
Actually, if they can control their D, I would say a higher D and a higher S, or excuse me, a higher I, because they have, or we would hope they have people within their realm that would be their S and C, which would carry out the minutia, the day-to-day things. They need to be in control. They don't need to be even a high D still needs to adapt it down, but he is the one that can make the decisions, and he has enough backbone to carry them through.
Okay, so again, what I'm hearing you say is, once you have a reality and a realization of what your own behavior patterns are, can your behavior patterns be controlled?
Yeah, they can if you want to. This is actually a case of whether you want to or not. Most people they want to do whatever it is that's within them, a DISE, they want to do that. But when they realize that this is what other people are seeing, then a lot of times they'll come back with me and say, okay, help me control this. And it's not a matter of control, it's a matter of thinking it through. And believe it or not, you're not just a D, you're not just an I, you're not an S or C, you're a mixture of all. So let's say you're a high D, depending on your other three is how the D will be controlled within yourself. And these are your core values. All of them are adaptive. We tend to go back to our core when we're afraid or when we're angry. So other than those times, you can control and basically be the person you want to be. I had to learn to do the minutia. I can do it. I still don't like doing it. I like to start the projects. I prefer someone else finishing them because I want to move to the next one, but that's one of my traits. Thank goodness I have people around me that don't like to start projects, and they love to finish the ones I start. That's what we call an implementer or a visionary. I'm more of a visionary. I like to put the things out there, and then I like to have an implementer take them and run with them.
Great. So Again, if someone wanted to have a DISC assessment done, what's the process? How do they do this? Because you've often shared with me, it's very hard to understand the DISC of others until you understand your own. Is that a true statement?
I would never try to get someone to understand someone's till they understand themselves. Because number one, they have to understand how they think so they can understand how to read someone else's thoughts.
So what's involved in taking a DISC assessment? How is this done?
We can send you out a link. There's 3 parts to it. They take about 10, 15 minutes a section. They have to be done when it's a fairly quiet time, no distractions, because once you stop, or once you start, you can't stop and start back. So you need to have no disruptions. And DISC is based on how you are that day at that moment. You don't want to look to where you want to be in the future or where you've been in the past. It's how you are right at the moment. And there's just sections of questions. They're little slide boxes. You can rearrange them. But you just don't want to take too long. Usually your first instinct is best of all.
Is there a way that a person can alter the DISC in the way they take it? And if that's done, can it be detected in the assessment?
You can't always catch it, but as a rule, if you do it, there are qualifiers in there. And if you answer the way the questions are asked, if you answer it one way one time and one the next, it'll do a kickback, meaning you're manipulating one answer or the other, or you did not understand it. And so when those qualifiers come in, then you either have to answer both of them wrong or both of them right to make it to score. And usually you can look at your DISC and you know if it's right or wrong.
So when you get the results back after you've taken a DISC assessment, how lengthy is this assessment? I mean, is this pages and pages or just a couple pages? What does a DISC assessment look like?
If you're running the first 2 sections, it's 58 pages. If you run the second page or the third section with it, there's 78 pages to this particular DISC.
Okay. And part of what you do with this is you do a debriefing of the individual, because most of us are not going to be able to actually understand our DISC assessment. Would that be correct?
Basically, a D&I won't read it, okay? So an S&C will study it, but the thing is, a lot of the things you won't see, another person will. So that second set of eyes is what you need, and the ability to know how to read it is what we do as a debriefer. We take you through, we show you where your qualifiers could have been off. We also show you how to read it and understand it like it is, since you're not just a D and not just an I or the other two. We show you how to read between and do it. And you also have your values in there. So with values, that can shuffle it also. So it really takes someone that has a knowledge of it to help you read through it and gain what you honestly need to know.
Got you covered. So with this tool, using this with your employees, with your team members, does this enable you to be a better manager of those people?
I would never try to manage people without knowing what their DISC assessment read or something to give me an idea of what to do with them. You can spot part of it just by looking and talking to people, but you can't get into the inner core unless you have some insight into who they really are.
Okay, so the title of today's webinar, what I titled it was Communication. It may be your answer to better leadership and higher sales. Would you agree with that?
Definitely, because without communication, number one, you can't be a leader. You have to have that communication, especially in today's world. And if you want to have higher sales, communication is the thing that you've got to have, but most people think communication is talking. 80% of communication is listening.
Okay. How important is body language during the communication process? When you're talking to someone, even if you're saying the best words possible, can your body language blow it for you?
In a heartbeat. I'm a big body language person. The thing about it, a D and an I, they're looking for somebody that has, a D and I are looking at people to see if they have any emotions. An S and a C cannot, if you reach your hands out to an S or a C, a high S, high C, they're going to back up. It's I don't want to use the word fear factor, but it's a restriction pattern. They have their space. A D and an I seem to share everybody's space. So yes, just your body language. A S and a C, if you frail your hands around, move them too much, they're distracted. Again, they're looking for detail. And if your hand movement or your eye movement or the way you are moving your body draws their attention, then they're not focusing on what you said.
So also from the manner of sales, by knowing your own disc and being able to control your disc, can this result in a higher return on sales? In other words, will you close more jobs?
You'll close a lot more. I have, to this point, never did an assessment on anybody in the sales field that their sales did not increase once they knew their disc and once we went through some body language.
Right. And one of the things that we did last year, we did a presentation to a company that was outside the industry. And part of this was they had 26 members of their sales team. And one of the things that they did before we did the training was they had a disc assessment done. Were you able to review the disc assessments and pick out the highest producing salesperson they had?
We picked out the top 3 and the bottom 3 for them.
And you did not know this going in. This all came from the assessments. How shocked was the employer when they were able to predict these type of things?
He had us come in and do a class on how to use the disc with other people. So it impressed him highly.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So in actuality, like I said, the disc assessment process is almost like being able to read a person's mind, being able to use this effectively in your business from the aspect of managing, from coaching, from selling. These are all advantages. So again, it's just like Dr. Maxwell said today in his morning minute that he puts out every day. Communication and what you're saying when you're not speaking. And this puts it out in the body language mode. It's unreal whenever you can see these things in yourself. Agreed?
I agree. And believe me, there's a lot more said when someone's not speaking than when they've got their mouth open.
Okay. So as you go through this, we talked about presidents of the United States. Could you name me a president with a D personality?
Trump.
Donald Trump. Could you name me a president with an I personality?
Clinton.
Could you name me a president with an S personality?
None right off the top.
What about a C personality?
None right off the top. You're usually going to have a D and an I.
So as a rule, leaders in that realm are going to be high D's and high I's because of the commanding presence they have to have.
That's the main reason.
Okay. So there you go. Again, we wanted to speak to you this month about communication styles because in today's world, Cheryl, is communication becoming more and more important to the average citizen in the United States?
It's becoming more than it ever was for 2 reasons. Number one, at this moment, as we're doing this webinar, there's social distancing. There is more, like we're doing on here, there's more internet presence. And you've got to have communication skills more now than ever because you've got to reach those people. Used to just being around them was enough. Now you've got to talk to them, and you have got to talk to people and get through to them relatively fast because you don't have that time that you can make that bonding like you used to.
Okay, so Cheryl, I know that you, just like myself, care very deeply for the members of the chimney service industry and the membership of the National Chimney Sweep Guild. So if someone wanted to know more about DISC, how could they reach you to have a discussion? What's the best way to get in touch with you if they want to know more about the DISC assessment process?
Probably the best way would be by email, and mine is Cheryl with a S, SHERYL at cvcsuccessgroup.com. But I'm also very accessible by phone. It's 704-425-0211, and text is great or a call is great. I'm here for you guys.
So there you have it. If you want to raise your communication skills, if you want to increase your leadership skills, if you want to increase your sales skills, if you want to make more of an impact with others, Cheryl, is DISC a way to do this?
To me, it is. Some people are intuitive, okay? A lot are. But when you can see it written on paper, it's a way to reach out to somebody. And it's the main part, it's a way to know yourself.
Okay. So we hope that this information has been helpful to you this month. Like I said, we wanted to speak to you about communication because in today's world, communication is more important than it's ever been. And listening is more important than it's ever been. As Cheryl said a while ago, listening is a very important part of, communication. Without the skill to listen, and again, if you have that high D personality, listening is going to be difficult for you. It is the way that it is. And once you can understand this and work on controlling this, what you're going to find out is your results in life just may be better in business, as a manager, as an owner, as a husband, as a wife, as a father, or as a child. So keep these things in mind. Let's work on communication and let's take it up to the next level. So we appreciate you joining this week. Let us know how we can help you. This is Jerry Eisenhower and
Cheryl Eisenhower.
And we appreciate having the opportunity to speak with you in this manner. It's an honor, it's a privilege, and it's a pleasure. So until next month, be successful, be safe, and hope that you get your dreams and turn them into your realities. Talk to you next time. Appreciate you joining us.